Today we're going to be looking at Iroiro in the color light blue. My husband got me to start watching Avatar: The Last Airbender, so now when I look at that, it's really hard not to think Iroh. And I don't know if that's actually how you're supposed to say it, but I'm assuming not, because Iroh is spelled with an H at the end, so if anyone actually knows how to say it, let me know. Also, before we get started, I just want to say a big ol' thank you to you guys. I recently hit 15,000 subscribers, and it's crazy, like, to think that 15,000 different people saw my channel and decided that they wanted to continue to see my channel. It's just amazing. So thank you guys so very much. So first I want to say these are human hair swatches, but they are not all virgin hair. The only one that is virgin hair is going to be the number 4 black swatch. I do have them labeled 1 through 12, but that's not synonymous with hair levels. We're going to be doing close-ups and pictures at the end of the video, so the numbers just help us keep track of each swatch. Number 1 is a green, 2 is gray, 3 is a natural red, 4 is black, and then from 4 to 11 we have a range that goes to platinum blonde, and then number 12 is like a toned version of number 11. So with these videos, I like to put the dye directly from the container at the top of each swatch. And then some people do like to dilute their dyes, so I'm going to do a diluted version at the bottom of each swatch. Please keep in mind that everyone's hair is different, so everyone's hair will take dye differently. So please just use my video as a reference as to how the dye could possibly turn out. For the diluted section, we're going to try doing equal parts. Hopefully that's not too much diluter. I'm a little scared that it is, but I guess we'll see. But that's going to be the same amount of light blue to diluter. If you're not sure what diluter is, the simple answer is that it lightens the color of the dye. And if you're wondering what I just use a plain white conditioner. Alright, I'm going to let these sit for about 3 hours. I will rinse them out, and when they're dry, I'll meet you back here and we can do some comparisons. So I will say I was expecting this to be a lot more pastel than it's turned out to be. It's actually closer to a mid-tone blue versus a pastel. Even though it did technically dye the darker blonde swatches and the brownish swatches, I wouldn't really recommend doing that. I personally think it looks the best on the 11 and 12 swatch, but if you do have pieces of your hair that are in this range of color, you can at least see what they would turn out like if you did use this on your hair. I do have a little issue with this dye though. So I don't try to be a review channel in that I talk about my opinions on the colors and stuff. I try to keep it more simple, just keep it to the swatches and that's it. But I have noticed on this color, for some reason, it did dye kind of patchy. Now, of course, I'm not saying my application is perfect. I'm sure it could use some help, but in my mind, if this is happening to me, there's a good chance it could happen to you too. So at first, I thought maybe it's the texture of the dye. So some brands like Arctic Fox and Manic Panic, they have very creamy, almost liquidy hair dyes. Hair dyes like that, I've noticed, tend to dye a little bit better because it's easier for the hair to soak up the color. And then other brands like Good Dye Young and Iroiro, they're a little bit thicker and chunkier, which is usually when I've noticed patchiness happening the most, is with thicker dyes. But I'm noticing the patchiness even on the diluted sections where I mixed in some conditioner, which usually if you have a thick dye, they do recommend. I've heard people, not like professionals necessarily, but I've heard people recommend using a diluter or conditioners to liquefy a dye, so just a few drops so it doesn't lighten the color and just makes it easier to apply. My point though is that if it's happening on the diluted section as well, that has something to do with the dye itself and not necessarily the texture of the dye. And I'm thinking it has something to do with the color. So I've done a few other iroiro dyes on my channel so far, and I've only had this problem with, I believe, one other color, and that was their turquoise. I did a green and a neon pink, I believe. And both of those came out really beautiful. I didn't have any patchiness with those, but like I said, the turquoise color, there was some patchiness. So I'm thinking maybe it's the blue pigment in both of the dyes that might be struggling to attach to the hair. But honestly, I don't know. I am just throwing out there something that I've noticed, even on the number 11 swatch. Under this light, it actually looks really nice, but in my bathroom lighting, I felt like I could see the patchiness a lot better. So that is just a warning. Not saying that this is a bad dye or anything, of course, because like I said, there is a chance that it is me. But the correlation I've noticed, at least with iroiro, is that it's the blue dyes that I've done that have given me patchiness, while as their pink and green did not do that. So as for color comparisons, I have a few that I want to do today. I always try to do the least similar to the most similar, and I don't always get that perfect, but today I want to start with Manic Panic in the color After Midnight. This is comparable to number 12. This is comparable to number 11. And number 10. So After Midnight isn't a super dark blue, but it is slightly darker than the light blue. And when I did the After Midnight, I was still doing two separate diluted sections, so it does look different than the light blue for that reason. Now, After Midnight to me does come off as a much more cool tone blue when it's in its full pigment, but as you dilute it, you can see there is a slight bit of green that comes through. At the time, I thought it was the blue mixing with the yellow hair, creating the green color. But now that I have this light blue here, that's obviously very, very cool toned. I do think After Midnight does have a touch of green in it. So unless you have very, very cool toned hair underneath, like the number 12 swatch, After Midnight diluted will turn more turquoisey than the light blue is on its own. The next comparison I wanted to do is Arctic Fox in the color Poseidon. This is comparable to number 12, number 11, and number 10. Again, when I did Poseidon, I was doing two separate diluted parts. I think the middle section is going to be a little bit closer to what I did for the light blue. So I've noticed with some of the Arctic Fox colors, they will be bright but also muted at the same time. I don't know how to describe that better. But I feel like you can kind of see that here. Poseidon is a pretty and like cool tone blue, but compared to the light blue, it does have a little bit more of a smokiness to it. But I've seen Poseidon on people's hair before, and it doesn't necessarily look smoky. I think in just compared to some dyes that are very bright and saturated, Poseidon can look a little bit more muted. And maybe it's just me. Hopefully you can see it on camera, but I do feel like you can see a very, very, very slight bit more of green in Poseidon compared to the light blue. The light blue is a very, very cool toned blue. The last comparison I wanted to do is Lunar Tides in the color Blue Velvet. This is comparable to number 12. This is comparable to number 11. And this is comparable to number 10. So what I was thinking when I saw the Blue Velvet diluted was that it looked very similar to the light blue. Blue Velvet is very cool toned as well. So I was hoping that they'd look similar to where you can maybe dilute Blue Velvet a little less than I did and maybe get a similar result here. But now that I'm seeing them next to each other, I actually might think that the Poseidon from Arctic Fox is going to be a better match. I'm not really sure how the light blue did it, but I feel like the diluted section really does not hold much of a green look at all, whereas all of the other diluted blues I've looked at so far have a slightly green look, unless it's on the toned swatch, like number 12. So that's interesting. I don't know how that works, but it could technically be the swatches too. Whoever's hair this is, there is a chance that it takes better to cool tones, and so it doesn't look as green as the other swatches. That's the one thing with human hair, it's kind of a toss-up with what you might get sometimes. The Blue Velvet is very, very pigmented though, so you could actually even dilute it more than what I did to get an even lighter blue. And that's one of my favorite things about darker colors like that, is that you can get a base color that's very dark and then lighten it a whole bunch and get a bunch of nice colors in between as well. But yeah, like I said, I actually think the Poseidon from Arctic Fox is going to be a much closer match. So now that we're done looking at comparisons, I'd love to get into the close-ups, aka the before and after clips. Do keep in mind though, I use natural lighting for this part of the video and everything afterwards, and recreating the same exact environment with natural lighting can be very difficult. So if anything looks slightly off or different, that is probably why. I hope this video helped. If you have a request, I do have a link below to a Google form you can fill out. Just remember, I only do dyes that do not test on animals. Thank you to my patrons, and thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in my next video.